What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. In this video, we are taking a look at Chris Carson and breaking down his fantasy outlook for 2020. Hit that subscribe button for more videos like this one, and let's get right into it. Now, last year, a very productive year from Chris Carson. It was actually one of the guys that we were really heavily touting going near the end of the third round in most drafts. His ADP had jumped up a few weeks before the season had started because I think people realized what they were going to get in an offense that loves to run the ball and commits to the running back position pretty heavily. Chris Carson got a ton of run last year, 278 carries, 1,230 rushing yards, 37 receptions, and 266 receiving yards with 9 total touchdowns. Finished the season on a low note, fracturing his hip there near the end of the season in week 16, missed the playoffs, and this team really saw a bit of a fall from grace in terms of losing both of their starting running backs near the end of the season, which was a bit rough for them from a team perspective. They turned back around this year. That looks like Rashad Penny is going to be out for the beginning part of the season. Everyone's expecting him to be put onto the PUP list. They do go out and draft DJ Dallas, a teammate of Travis Homer, who's also on this team, and then they sign Carlos Hyde. So there's a bit more competition in terms of the run game this year for Chris Carson, and I think that will end up eating into his workload a little bit, but we can still appreciate what he did last year, finishing 12th at the running back position with 232.6 fantasy points, averaging 15.5 fantasy points per game, and with the exception of the week where he got hurt in week 3, he was solid. Week in, week out, very solid, gave you 2 top 6 weeks, a couple other weeks where he finished at or near 20 points. But for the most part, he was giving you about a 10-point baseline week in and week out, something that you'd expect to get from someone that you probably drafted as your running back too. A lot of people were drafting the end of the third, early fourth round. It's typically where you're drafting your second running back. So he performed as expected and returned a lot of value from where he was going. Now, obviously, being drafted around Aaron Jones and Austin Eckler around later got a little bit overshadowed by those guys who massively outproduced their ADP. But don't forget that Chris Carson did do a lot of good for the fantasy owners that had him. Now, started the season out with 3 straight fumbles lost. Definitely hurt his immediate upside, and you may have been able to acquire him in a trade early on in the season. Fumbles were definitely an issue for him, but I don't really see that as being too much of a detriment in terms of his fantasy outlook, because he fumbled a lot last year and they stuck with him. With Rashad Penny gone, I don't know how much they're going to actually use Carlos Hyde. I do think he's going to eat into the workload a little bit, but I think not drafting Chris Carson because you're afraid he's going to fumble doesn't really seem like a smart strategy. But I do think there's other reasons to avoid Chris Carson, as we'll get into in a second. So last year he finished with a 71.5% opportunity share, which was number 10 amongst running backs. I think that's going to come down a little bit with Carlos Hyde, DJ Dallas, and then eventually Rashad Penny coming back. I mean, this is a contract year for Chris Carson, so you can make the argument that the Seahawks could just run him into the ground, but there's really no data points to show that teams do that. Like, that's not a thing that happens. And to expect them to just go against what we have no data to show for is kind of a dumb argument, in my opinion. And arguably, I think the more likely thing to happen is when Rashad Penny is healthy, that they're going to try to give him some significant run, because if they know that they have something good in Rashad Penny, they'll probably let Chris Carson go in 2021. And they're really only going to know that if they actually try Rashad Penny out for one more year. And so from that angle, I could see Chris Carson kind of having a similar like renaissance in the start of the year, and then have his volume tick down drastically when Rashad Penny comes back near the second half of the year, similar to what we saw with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt last year. Not that I'm calling Rashad Penny Kareem Hunt, but he has been efficient with his touches. Now, getting back to Chris Carson, though, finished with a 27% juke rate, which is 15th amongst running backs, 4.7% breakaway run rate, which was 17th, and 526 yards created for a hefty number 4 at the position. And he didn't face the best game script either, or the best run blocking efficiency. Arguably, this offensive line is going to be a little bit worse this year, and at least as far as we can predict in the preseason. He faces the third toughest strength of schedule against the run. So there's a lot of good things about what Chris Carson did last year that we could expect to regress this year. If he plays tougher defenses, offensive line regresses a little bit, we could expect his efficiency to come down. Carlos Hyde has been a bit of a jerk in terms of how much work he steals from the lead back in the offense. At least, I mean, we saw last year with the continued insistence to use him in Houston. He gives coaches that love to run the ball exactly what they want. He gives them a few yards and is consistent on that. Doesn't really give you incredible upside, but he does his job of what he's supposed to do, and he doesn't make coaches angry, and he isn't really prone for fumbling the ball a lot. So we could see Chris Carson get pulled out for Carlos Hyde a good bit in the beginning of the season, and then again, my expectation is that the Seahawks really need to see whether or not Rashad Penny is going to be their future before they decide whether or not to give Chris Carson a second contract. So all that being said, I'm expecting there to be a pretty steady drop in efficiency and a drop in his opportunity share, which means I'm probably out on Chris Carson. So even though he hasn't seen his ADP rise, he's actually going a little bit later than he did last year. You can typically get him around the middle of the 4th round. I'm not typically targeting running backs in that position. Like there's typically, I feel the smart move there is to take a receiver. So I'm probably going to be avoiding Chris Carson for the most part. Right now, we have him projected to not quite hit 1,000 rushing yards. We have him getting 33 receptions, again, around 281 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. But that's a pretty big drop off from where he finished last year. And I don't really think he has that much upside either, considering the likely weakening of the offensive line, the tough strength of schedule against the run, the increased competition in the backfield with Carlos Hyde and DJ Dallas, and with Rashad Penny coming back. All of that just makes a blend of a running back that I'm probably going to avoid in pretty much all formats this year. But let me know if you guys agree or disagree. I do think what he did last year was pretty solid, and if you had him last year, you might be tempted to go back to the well. But I'm preaching a bit of caution for what we can expect from Chris Carson into 2020. Thank you guys for watching. Again, please hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot, and we will see you guys in the next